Hi everyone, today is my birthday. I turned 47 today. I just thought I should use this day to thank God for adding another year to me, to my life. But it's a weird one this year because there are many people that we know about that don't get to celebrate their birthday in 2020. From those people that have died due to the coronavirus, over 38,000 in the UK as of today, and many, many more around the world. To those people whose lives have been taken away by other people because they are black. So I want to use my birthday today to just talk about this issue and pledge my support to anyone out there who is fighting the virus, to all the health workers, to all the frontline workers, but also to bring to your attention a name that I feel we should be saying. So we should be saying Breonna Taylor. Let me tell you about Breonna Taylor. She is a woman, a 26-year-old woman, who was murdered in her own apartment in Louisville, Kentucky in March. The police went in and they were exchanging gunfire with her boyfriend and she died. Because that was not in public, because we didn't see what happened, there's a chance her name is not coming out and people may not know her. So today, I want to say her name. I want to say, Breonna Taylor, we will never forget you. And everybody else that is helping us to stand up to this brutality, to stand up to the bullies, to stand up to the injustice, to everybody else who is talking about black and white. Let's talk. Let's continue fighting for justice for those that have gone, but also for peace and humanity, because I know we've got it in us to do that. And the only way we can move forward is by talking about these issues openly, by having open conversations about race, having open conversations about black and white, so that we can educate each other. Those that don't know anything can learn. Those of us that know very little can learn. And those of us that can share, we can teach. I want to leave you today with a TED Talk by Professor Kimberly Crenshaws, who is the one who coined the word intersectionality. And basically, in the simplest terms, intersectionality talks about the difficulty that black women, or in her terms, African American women, but I believe it applies to black women, have to suffer for being a woman and also for being black. And intersectionality can apply to a lot of other situations. But in my case, I am applying it to how it was applied by Professor Crenshaw, by bell hooks, by people like Patricia Hill Collins, and I want, like them, to do what I can to help the conversation. I don't have all the answers, but I believe as we start talking about it, as we continue to talk about it, because it's been talked about for years, but we can't stop. And so we need to continue. So I'm saying her name again, Breonna Taylor. We will not forget you. And hopefully justice will be served and your family will be able to rest, just like they will for all the other people. And today, on my birthday, my message to you is, let us continue to talk peacefully. Let our leaders listen, whether we are in the UK, the US, China, Africa, wherever it is. This is a humanity issue. This is a human rights issue. This is not about where. It's about who we are as a human race. And as we continue to celebrate whatever we are celebrating, let's just remember those people who are no longer with us. And as I continue today to celebrate my birthday with my family in a very different way, because we are inside the house, we are still under lockdown, I will remember not just the people that are out there that have lost their lives, but even those that we don't know about, whether they've lost it due to coronavirus because Black people are disproportionately affected by it. So we have more people that have died, some of whom we'll never know because maybe their status in the country where they were living was not clear. So nobody knows where they are. But also those who have died on the front line because of the structural issues that puts us at higher risk. I'm going to try and attach a TED Talk by Professor Crenshaw, and I'll also post it together with this link. Please, please, please take time to watch it, because it will help you to realize that this issue is not a small issue, and this issue is not just about Black people. This issue is about the human race. This issue is about everybody's human rights. This issue is about the children that we are bringing into this world, and their children after that, and everybody else, whether they are Black, white, whatever color they are. It's about all of us. Thank you very much.
I'd like to try something new. Those of you who are able, please stand up. Okay, so I'm going to name some names. When you hear a name that you don't recognize, you can't tell me anything about them, I'd like you to take a seat and stay seated. The last person standing, we're going to see what they know, okay? All right. Eric Garner. Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray. So those of you who are still standing, I'd like you to turn around and take a look. I'd say half to most of the people are still standing. So let's continue. Michelle Cusseau. Tanisha Anderson. Ara Russer. Megan Hockaday. So if we look around again, there are about 4 people still standing. And actually, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I just say that to encourage transparency, so you can be seated. So those of you who recognize the first group of names know that these were African Americans who've been killed by the police over the last 2.5 years. What you may not know is that the other list is also African Americans who have been killed within the last 2 years. Only one thing distinguishes the names that you know from the names that you don't know: gender. So let me first let you know that there's nothing at all distinct about this audience that explains the pattern of recognition that we've just seen. I've done this exercise dozens of times around the country. I've done it to women's rights organizations. I've done it with civil rights groups. I've done it with professors. I've done it with students. I've done it with psychologists. I've done it with sociologists. I've done it even with progressive members of Congress. And everywhere, the awareness of the level of police violence that Black women experience is exceedingly low. Now, it is surprising, isn't it, that this would be the case? I mean, there are 2 issues involved here. There's police violence against African Americans, and there's violence against women, 2 issues that have been talked about a lot lately. But when we think about who is implicated by these problems, when we think about who's victimized by these problems, the names of these Black women never come to mind. Now, communications experts tell us that when facts do not fit with the available frames, people have a difficult time incorporating new facts into their way of thinking about a problem. These women's names have slipped through our consciousness because there are no frames for us to see them, no frames for us to remember them, no frames for us to hold them. As a consequence, reporters don't lead with them, policymakers don't think about them, and politicians aren't encouraged or demanded that they speak to them. Now, you might ask, well, why does a frame matter? I mean, after all, an issue that affects Black people and an issue that affects women, wouldn't that necessarily include Black people who are women and women who are Black people? Well, the simple answer is that this is a trickle-down approach to social justice, and many times it just doesn't work. Without frames that allow us to see how social problems impact all the members of a targeted group, many will fall through the cracks of our movements, left to suffer in virtual isolation. But it doesn't have to be this way. Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. Now, the experience that gave rise to intersectionality was my chance encounter with a woman named Emma DeGraffenreid. Emma DeGraffenreid was an African-American woman, a working wife, and a mother. I actually read about Emma's story from the pages of a legal opinion written by a judge who had dismissed Emma's claim of race and gender discrimination against a local car manufacturing plant. Emma, like so many African-American women, sought better employment for her family and for others. She wanted to create a better life for her children and for her family. But she applied for a job, and she was not hired, and she believed that she was not hired because she was a Black woman. Now, the judge in question dismissed Emma's suit. And the argument for dismissing the suit was that the employer did hire African Americans, and the employer hired women. The real problem, though, that the judge was not willing to acknowledge was what Emma was actually trying to say, that the African Americans that were hired, usually for industrial jobs, maintenance jobs, were all men. And the women that were hired, usually for secretarial or front office work, were all white. Only if the court was able to see how these policies came together would he be able to see the double discrimination that Emma DeGraff Reed was facing. But the court refused to allow Emma to put two causes of action together to tell her story because he believed that by allowing her to do that, she would be able to have preferential treatment. She'd have an advantage by being able to have two swings at the bat when African American men and white women only had one swing at the bat. But, of course, neither African American men or white women needed to combine a race and gender discrimination claim to tell the story of the discrimination they were experiencing. Why wasn't the real unfairness law's refusal to protect African American women simply because their experiences weren't exactly the same as white women and African American men? Rather than broadening the frame to include African American women, the court simply tossed their case completely out of court. Now, as a student of anti-discrimination law, as a feminist, as an anti-racist, I was struck by this case. It felt to me like injustice squared. So first of all, black women weren't allowed to work at the plant. Second of all, the court doubled down on this exclusion by making it legally inconsequential. And to boot, there was no name for this problem. And we all know that where there's no name for a problem, you can't see a problem. And when you can't see a problem, you pretty much can't solve it. Many years later, I'd come to recognize that the problem that Emma was facing was a framing problem. The frame that the court was using to see gender discrimination or to see race discrimination was partial, and it was distorting. For me, the challenge that I faced was trying to figure out whether there was an alternative narrative, a prism that would allow us to see Emma's dilemma, a prism that would allow us to rescue her from the cracks in the law, that would allow judges to see her story. So it occurred to me, maybe a simple analogy to an intersection might allow judges to better see Emma's dilemma. So if we think about this intersection, the roads to the intersection would be the way that the workforce was structured by race and by gender. And then the traffic in those roads would be the hiring policies and the other practices that ran through those roads. Now, because Emma was both black and female, she was positioned precisely where those roads overlapped, experiencing the simultaneous impact of the company's gender and race traffic. The law was like that ambulance that shows up and is ready to treat Emma only if it can be shown that she was harmed on the race road or on the gender road, but not where those roads intersected. So, what do you call being impacted by multiple forces and then abandoned to fend for yourself? Intersectionality seemed to do it for me. I would go on to learn that African American women, like other women of color, like other socially marginalized people all over the world, were facing all kinds of dilemmas and challenges as a consequence of intersectionality, intersections of race and and gender, of heterosexism, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism. All of these social dynamics come together and create challenges that are sometimes quite unique. But in the same way that intersectionality raised our awareness to the way that Black women live their lives, it also exposes the tragic circumstances under which African American women die. Police violence against Black women is very real. The level of violence that Black women face is such that it's not surprising that some of them did not survive their encounters with police. Black girls as young as 7, great-grandmothers as old as 95 have been killed by the police. They've been killed in their living rooms, in their bedrooms. They've been killed in their cars. They've been killed on the street. They've been killed in front of their parents, and they've been killed in front of their children. They have been shot to death. They have been stomped to death. They have been suffocated to death. They have been manhandled to death. They have been tasered to death. They've been killed when they've called for help. They've been killed when they were alone, and they've been killed when they were with others. They have been killed shopping while Black, driving while Black, having a mental disability while Black, having a domestic disturbance while Black. They've even been killed being homeless while Black. They've been killed talking on the cell phone, laughing with friends, sitting in a car reported as stolen, and making a U-turn in front of the White House with an infant strapped in the back seat of the car. Why don't we know these stories? Why is it that their lost lives don't generate the same amount of media attention and communal outcry as the lost lives of their fallen brothers? It's time for a change. So what can we do? In 2014, the African American Policy Forum began to demand that we say her name at rallies, at protests, at conferences, at meetings, anywhere and everywhere that state violence against Black bodies is being discussed. But saying her name is not enough. We have to be willing to do more. We have to be willing to bear witness to the often painful realities that we would just rather not confront, the everyday violence and humiliation that many Black women have had to face. Black women across color, age, gender expression, sexuality, and ability. So we have the opportunity right now, bearing in mind that some of the images that I'm about to share with you may be triggering for some, to collectively bear witness to some of this violence. We're going to hear the voice of the phenomenal Abby Dobson. And as we sit with these women, some who've experienced violence and some who have not survived them, we have an opportunity to reverse what happened at the beginning of this talk, when we could not stand for these women because we did not know their names. So at the end of this clip, there's going to be a roll call. Several Black women's names will come up. I'd like those of you who are able to join us in saying these names as loud as you can, randomly, disorderly. Let's create a cacophony of sound to represent our intention to hold these women up, to sit with them, to bear witness to them, to bring them into the light.
Say her name. Say her name. Oh, say her name. Say her name. Say their names, for all the names I'll never know.
I asked Sharon Jones, Denise Fonville, Katherine Johnson, Kayla Moore, Michelle Cassell, Rakia Boyd, Shelley Frey, Tarika Yvette Smith.
Say their name.
As I said at the beginning, if we can't see a problem, we can't fix a problem. Together, we've come together to bear witness to these women's lost lives. But the time now is to move from mourning and grief to action and transformation. This is something that we can do. It's up to us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.